At 11:17 p.m., a sergeant took off his boots on the west bank of the Rhine. He was not carrying a radio. He was not carrying a rifle. He was carrying a waxed map, a pencil, and one reason not to drown. Patton needed to know whether the silence across that river was empty or waiting. The river was black. The air was cold enough to make metal bite skin. And on the far bank, somewhere in the dark, German machine guns were dug into slopes the maps could not explain. 2 reconnaissance reports had come in that afternoon. One said the best crossing lane was open. The other said it was a trap. And the difference between those 2 reports was not paperwork. It was hundreds of men in assault boats, engines idling in the dark, waiting for somebody to point at one piece of water and say, "There." The sergeant's name was Thomas Riley. He was 27 years old, Irish-American, from a narrow street outside Worcester, Massachusetts, where his father repaired boilers, and his mother could tell which neighbor was coming by the sound of their shoes on the steps. That was the first thing Riley learned before the war. People make different sounds when they are afraid. By 1945, he had learned the same rule in uniform. He had heard German sentries who were nervous. He had heard tired infantry who were pretending not to be. He had heard artillery crews who knew they were covered. And he had heard silence that meant nobody was there. But there was another kind of silence. The kind made by men who were holding their breath behind guns. That was the silence Patton's staff could not photograph. The Third Army was on the Rhine because Germany was running out of ground. Towns had fallen. Bridges had gone down. Roads were jammed with prisoners, wrecked wagons, burned-out half-tracks, and civilians pulling carts through mud. But the Rhine was different. It was not just another river. It was the last great wet wall before the interior of Germany opened. You could move fast across fields. You could blast through towns. You could go around a roadblock. You could not bluff a river at night. You either crossed it or you died in it. The engineers had already studied current charts. The artillery officers had marked suspected gun pits. The aerial photographs had been passed from table to table until the paper edges went soft. And still, nobody could agree. One bank looked thinly held from above. Another looked dangerous. A third looked empty, but only because the shadows swallowed the bluff. At 9:40 p.m., Riley stood in a farmhouse kitchen being used as a command post and listened while captains argued over grease pencil lines on a map. He did not interrupt at first. He stood by the stove, helmet under one arm, and watched a major tap the river with the back of a pencil. "We can't wait 2 more days," the major said. "If we wait, they reinforce." Another officer said, "If we pick wrong, they won't need to reinforce." That was when Riley spoke. "I can cross." No one answered him, not because they had not heard, because every man in that room understood exactly what the sentence meant. The major looked up. "You can what?" "I can cross, sir. Quiet. No boat, no engine, no flare. I go in downstream, come out where they don't expect a swimmer, get close enough to hear what's actually there, and come back before first light." Someone laughed once, not because it was funny, because the body sometimes laughs before the mind accepts fear. The major said, "That water is near freezing." "Yes, sir." "You will cramp before you are halfway across." "Maybe, sir." "There are patrols on the far bank." "Yes, sir." "If they catch you, there is no extraction." Riley nodded. Then the major asked the question the room was waiting for. "What do you think you can learn that a camera cannot?" Riley looked at the map. "A camera can show a gun pit," he said. "It cannot tell you if the men inside it have slept. It cannot tell you if they are new to the ground. It cannot tell you if they talk like they expect to hold." He looked up. "I can." The room went still. That was the moment the general came in. Not with a speech, not with thunder. Just the hard sound of boots on plank flooring and a riding crop tucked under one arm. Everyone straightened. Patton looked at the map, then at the sergeant. "What's this?" The major said, "Sergeant Riley believes he can swim the river, recon the east bank by sound, and return before dawn." Patton's face did not change. He looked at Riley for a long second. Then he said, "Do you believe that, Sergeant?" Riley said, "No, sir." That made every officer in the room turn. Riley swallowed. "I believe I can get across. I believe I can listen. Coming back depends on the river." For the first time, Patton smiled. Not kindly, accurately. He said, "Then you understand the job." Riley was given until 0400, not 0410, not sunrise, 0400. If he was not back by then, the plan would proceed without him. At 11:05 p.m., he walked to the river with one lieutenant, one medic, and two engineers who knew not to ask questions. He stripped down to wool underlayers and darkened field clothing. No canteen, no pack, no rifle. One knife taped flat against his forearm. One waterproof pouch under his shirt holding a soft pencil and a folded sketch of the bank. The lieutenant said, "You sure about no weapon?" Riley looked at the far side. "If I need a rifle over there, I've already failed." The lieutenant did not argue. There are moments before danger when the world becomes too specific. Riley noticed the mud sucking at his socks. He noticed frost on a coil of signal wire. He noticed one engineer rubbing his thumb over a rosary bead and pretending not to. He noticed the river made almost no shine, just a moving blackness where the earth stopped. At 11:17, Riley stepped in. The cold did not feel like water. It felt like a hand closing around his chest. For the first 5 seconds, his body tried to breathe all at once. He forced it down. One breath, one stroke, another breath, another stroke. No splashing, no fighting the river like a strong man. That was how swimmers died. He let the current take him sideways and spent every movement buying distance without noise. Halfway across, his fingers stopped feeling like fingers. The pencil in the pouch tapped once against his ribs. It sounded impossibly loud. He froze in the water. Nothing from the far bank. No shout, no flare, no machine gun cutting the surface. So he moved again. By the time his knees touched mud on the eastern side, he had drifted far below the place he meant to land. That was acceptable. Living was acceptable. He lay in reeds with half his body still in water and listened. For 2 minutes there was only current, wind, and the dull thud of guns miles away. Then he heard a cough. Not close. Not far. Above him, slightly left from the slope. One man. Then another voice answered in German, low, bored, annoyed. Riley did not need the words yet. He needed the music of them. Men who are terrified do not complain about coffee the same way. Men who are expecting an attack do not laugh with their mouths open. These men were settled, too settled. He moved uphill on his stomach, inch by inch, stopping every time mud pulled at his sleeve. The first position was exactly where the second report warned it might be, tucked under the bluff line, not visible from the air unless you knew what shadow to distrust. He heard metal, a bolt drawn back and eased forward, then a crate lid shifting, then a man spitting. A machine gun crew. Not one gun, two. And they were not temporary. They had boards under the gun legs, ammunition stacked close, telephone wire running back from the position. Riley marked it by touch in the notebook. He did not write sentences. He could not risk time. 2 short lines, a small cross, a number. Then he kept moving. For the next 40 minutes, he learned why photographs lie. The riverbank looked ragged from above. On the ground, the raggedness had been improved by men with shovels. The old terrace walls were not just walls. They were firing shelves. The cart track was not just a cart track. It was a covered movement lane. The broken shed with half a roof was not abandoned. It was hiding a field telephone junction. Riley counted by sound. Boots on timber, mugs on stone, a horse snorting behind a screen. A sentry stamping his feet in a rhythm that told him where the listening post ended. He moved south. And then the sound changed. Not quieter. Thinner. There were still men there, still danger, still rifles that could end him in 1 second. But the bank no longer had the heavy, settled pressure of a prepared line. 2 voices, a long gap. 1 sentry moving too far between posts. No crate movement. No second crew answering the first. Not empty, but stretched. Riley stayed low behind a vineyard wall and listened for 15 full minutes. Nothing filled the gap. That was the information, not what he heard. What he did not hear. He wrote 3 marks in the notebook. Then a flare went up behind him. White light opened over the river. Riley went flat against the mud. For 1 second, every branch had a shadow. Every stone had an edge. Every wet patch on his sleeve flashed silver. A German voice shouted somewhere above the road. Another answered. Boots moved. Riley did not run. Running was for men who still believed speed could save them. He pressed his face into the mud and made himself become Riverbank. The footsteps came closer. 1 man stopped so near Riley could hear him breathing through his nose. The soldier muttered something about the cold. Another man laughed. The flare died. Darkness came back in pieces. Riley waited until the boots moved away. Then he waited longer. Because the first silence after danger is usually a trap set by your own fear. When he finally moved, his muscles no longer obeyed cleanly. The cold had been working on him since the first crossing. Now the mud had taken the heat he had left. He reached the water at 2:43 a.m. He had 1 hour and 17 minutes. The return was worse. Going over, the river had been an enemy he did not know yet. Coming back, he knew exactly what it wanted. It wanted his arms first, then his legs, then the small, sensible part of his mind that kept saying, "Stroke, breathe, stroke." After 10 minutes, he could not feel his feet. After 17, he could not tell if he was moving forward or simply being carried. After 20, he saw the western bank, and it did not seem to come closer. He thought of his father's boiler room in Worcester, the iron heat, the steam, the red valves, his father saying, "Listen before you touch." Machines tell you when they're angry. He almost laughed then. The Rhine was angry. He had listened to the Germans. Now he had to listen to the water. Do not fight the full current. Cut it. Let it spend itself. Use the dead patch behind the bend. He changed angle. His right calf locked. Pain went up the leg like wire. He bit the inside of his cheek and kept the sound in his mouth. The bank moved closer. Not quickly, not kindly, but closer. When his hand struck mud, he did not understand it at first. He tried to stand and fell. Tried again and got one knee under him. Someone grabbed his collar. He swung without knowing who it was. The lieutenant caught his wrist. "Easy, Riley, easy." Riley tried to speak, but his jaw would not shape words. The medic wrapped him in a blanket. His hands were shaking so hard the waterproof pouch might as well have been locked. Then he saw a figure 20 yards up the bank. Helmet, coat, rigid posture. Patton. For one confused second, Riley thought the cold had made a ghost. The general had no reason to be there, not physically, not at that hour, not in the mud beside a black river waiting for one sergeant. But he was. Patton said, "Can he talk?" The medic said, "In a minute, sir." Riley forced the words out anyway. "North lane is wrong." Patton stepped closer. Riley swallowed hard. "Not light. Dug in. 2 guns low, at least 1 more above. Wire back from the bluff. Ammunition stacked. They're settled in." Patton's eyes stayed on him. "And the other lane?" "Thin." "Not empty. Thin." Riley looked down at his own hands. They were shaking too hard to point. 2 posts I could place. Big gap between. No crew movement. No wire sound. No depth. Patton said, "You're certain?" Riley looked toward the river. "No, sir." That answer landed harder than yes would have. He said, "But I know the difference between men holding ground and men trying to make a line look held." Patton stared at the far bank. Then he said one word. "Shift." Not shouted, not explained, just decided. The officers behind him started moving. Maps were changed. Assault timings were rewritten. Engineers were woken. Artillery registrations were adjusted. Men who would never know Riley's name began preparing to cross a different piece of water. At 0600, Riley stood in a barn with a blanket over his shoulders and briefed officers who outranked him by years and by everything else. His voice was still rough. His hands still had not fully come back. But he gave them the bank. Not as a map, as a sound, the settled cough of the gun crew, the crate lid, the telephone wire, the thin space between sentries, the road where boots carried too far because there were not enough men to answer them. One captain asked, "How do you know a gap from quiet?" Riley looked at him. "Because quiet has weight." No one wrote that down. They wrote the coordinates. The crossing began the next night, not cleanly. No river crossing in war is clean. Boats scraped. Men cursed under their breath. A motor stalled and had to be restarted by hands that shook harder than the engine. German fire came in from the places Riley said it would. But the worst guns were not where the first plan had put the assault. The heavy prepared line was north of them. The gap was real. By dawn, the first bridgehead held. By afternoon, engineers were forcing order onto the river, 1 plank, 1 pontoon, 1 cable at a time. And men who should have been floating under the current were carrying ammunition up the far bank instead. That is the kind of victory history often makes small. A line in a report, a changed crossing point, A note that Reconnaissance confirmed enemy dispositions. It does not know what to do with a man who swims into freezing water to learn the shape of silence. After the war, Riley went home. Not to parades, not to speeches. Home. He worked in a repair shop first, then bought a little plumbing business with a sign so plain people walked past it for years without noticing. He married, had 2 sons, kept his tools clean, paid invoices on Fridays, listened more than he talked. At family dinners, when someone mentioned the war, he reached for bread or salt or a glass of water and let the conversation pass around him. His wife knew there were nights he woke with his right hand clenched so tight the knuckles went white. She knew that in March, when rain hit the windows a certain way, he would stand in the kitchen too long before answering a question. She did not push. Some men come home with stories, some come home with weather. Years later, one of his sons found an old waterproof pouch in a box behind furnace parts. Inside was a folded pencil sketch, browned at the creases. 3 marks on a riverbank, a cross, 2 short lines. A word written so hard the pencil almost tore the paper. Finn. His son brought it to the dinner table. "What is this?" Riley looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "Something I heard." That was all. The son waited. Riley rubbed his thumb across the paper, and for a second his hand looked older than the rest of him. He said, "They were going to send boys across the wrong water." His son asked, "Did you save them?" Riley's face changed. Not anger, not pride. Something more careful. He folded the paper once. "I came back and told them what I heard," he said. "Other men did the saving." That was the way he carried it, not as glory, as a task completed in the dark. The Rhine is still there, still wide, still cold in March, still moving over stones that remembered nothing. The bluffs are quiet now. The roads have names again. The vineyards grow where men once listened for boots in the dark. And the river gives back no explanation. But once, on a night when the maps disagreed and the photographs were not enough, one sergeant went into that water without a rifle. He crossed to hear what could not be seen, and when he came back, the army moved. He had crossed a river to listen. For the rest of his life, the cold stayed in his hands.